Meeting rooms will never die. They're the places that bring people together, where the truly unique ideas are born. But does the traditional meeting room satisfy the needs of the future? It's expensive, fixed, and full of materials which are impossible to recycle. We are living out one giant workplace experiment. Leases are getting shorter, spaces are changing faster. So we need furniture that's movable, reconfigurable, and scalable. The meeting room has been one of the few exceptions until now. Meet verandas, the meeting rooms you never throw away. We have created an engineered room system that is inherently sustainable, incorporates massive design choice, and is built for the future. Its modular design means any room variant can be disassembled and its component parts reused to create an entirely different structure. The durability of the system means this process can be endlessly repeated, eliminating waste. Here, we have a flexible, sustainable framework able to adapt to the evolving needs of the workplace in a circular fashion. Verandas, the meeting room choice if you care about the future. Arrive, thrive, and leave without a trace.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you're calling in from. Thank you very much for joining another panel of the Insights Live discussion here at Space Store. So today we're going to kick off with the topic of what's here to stay and what's gone for good in the workplace. Appreciate everybody joining us. And as we go throughout this panel discussion, please feel free to drop any questions down into the Q&A box and we'll strive to answer them as we go throughout this discussion. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our panel today. We have John with Microsoft, Emily with Perkins and Will, and Dan with Pontefract Group. And I am joined today by Nick Baxter, our UK Managing Director here at Space Store. John, why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Great, thanks, Gordon. Thanks everyone for joining. Great to be here. My name's John Scherer, and I'm a global workplace strategist at Microsoft. So really my role is overseeing a strategic program, a document that we use to deliver our Microsoft workplaces globally. So this is something that we give external architects who are hired to deliver a Microsoft workplace. And so really that program's kind of fed by a ongoing stream of workplace research and engagement with our business groups to understand what their space needs, and then translating those into to space requirements and design requirements for our standards. My background is in architecture. I worked for about 5 years on a variety of actually stadium projects in Chicago. And then decided to go to business school to really gain some experience that I was looking for, trying to understand some of my clients a bit better, and some background I didn't get as a designer, and yeah, landed in the world of workplace strategy, which I feel like is a great mashup between my sort of prior life as a designer and really, working within the context of these large, complex organizations like Microsoft. So happy to be here and talk to you all.
Yeah, thank you, John. Appreciate you having you on. Emily.
Thanks, Gordon. Thanks, John, also. And I am as well happy to be here with everyone. I am Emily Klein. I am an associate principal and the director of workplace for Perkins and Will here. I am based in the Boston area in the States. And what we do is help companies reimagine and think about the future of work. What we're doing is creating, I think at this moment in time, human-centric workplaces. And so we partner with clients in a variety of ways. As I oversee this practice here, I am part of a larger firm-wide practice in planning and strategies. We're designers, we're strategists, we are planners, and we are change agents. And what we're doing is helping our clients in developing and looking at their portfolio, building portfolio strategies, their place strategies, and we're helping them understand those connections between strategic objectives and where clients want to go, and the core elements of people, process, place, and technology. So there are a variety of things that we do in terms of space planning and programming, in terms of really looking at change and moving through change. My background is in strategy and organization development. I'm also a ProSci certified change practitioner and really have been in this space for a long time in terms of workplace strategy and future of work and helping companies, partnering with them to realize how to create workspaces and workplaces that employees want to come to and that meet the trends and the needs of the moment.
That's excellent. Really appreciate you being here. And Dan.
Hey, Gordon. Hey, all. Dan Pontefract. I'm a Canadian living in Canada, so I'll say sorry a lot. So I'm sorry about that. Also, I lost my hair before the pandemic, so spoiler alert, been bald for a while. I've been an executive for, I don't know, about just over 2 decades in high tech and telecom. So places like SAP, before that, Business Objects, and about 10 years at TELUS, which is kind of like, for those in the States, like the AT&T of Canada. And in those roles, I was things like chief learning officer, chief envisioner, chief chef. No, I'm kidding about that. But what I did was I helped organizations and the team members and the executives shift their culture. And a lot of that had to do with shifting to flexible work styles, at least as we called it, both at SAP and at TELUS, which meant you could work from anywhere. And this was like, eons before the pandemic hit. So I have a lot of firsthand experience on how to shift, leadership, culture, collaboration, and all the above when it comes to, how teams operate and collaborate remotely, so to say. I went out on my own 3 years ago, and I've been helping organizations ever since around the world, places like Autodesk, Salesforce, State of Tennessee, a bunch of places across Canada, helping them with their culture shift, and obviously more recently, this shift to hybrid work. So happy to be here today and share whatever sorrowful Canadian insights I may, Gordon. Thank you.
And we're not going to hold that against you. We are very pleased to have you on board. So thank you for that. We appreciate the insight that the three of you bring. And Nick, why don't you just give us a quick intro?
Yeah, good. Thank you, Gordon. And thanks again, John and Emily and Dan, for joining us on this panel today. Very pleased to be on another panel. And while my job is UK Managing Director, insights and what's going on in the world of work, workplace, and designing to it is really my passion here. There's always new products and concepts coming through. There's always a recent launch, and some of you saw the trailer at the beginning of our verandas product, the modular, flexible meeting room solution. So I get involved a lot in that and talk to as many workplace directors as I can. Really pleased to be part of this today, Gordon.
Yeah, thank you, Nick. And yeah, I echo that. I'm quite pleased to be part of this as well. So just as a background, Gordon McDonald, I am a workplace strategist here at Space Store based in our New York Design Center. And as the same with Nick, work with a lot of workplace leaders on what is the future of work. Obviously, that's been completely turned on its head by the pandemic. And, we saw some shifts and trends before the pandemic, but I think that really leads us right into our topic today that we want to discuss is what's here to stay and what's going for good in the workplace. And Emily, I'd like to kick this off with you, if that's all right. If you can give us a little bit of a background as to what you're seeing with your clients, what are some of the things that you see changing, and then some of the things that are completely gone?
I think many clients that we work with, and really all organizations across the globe right now, are rethinking, right? So what is it that we have learned about how, when, and where we work today? It took a pandemic to be a catalyst for us to better understand that actually using these kinds of technologies, right, including, like I use Teams, we've got Microsoft here represented, but there's Zoom also, because we're on Zoom, that we can actually be productive from wherever we are. And at the same time, while so many across the globe have realized we can be productive from wherever we are, we know that the office isn't going away either. That the research has really shown, the research we've done at Perkins and with our clients, is that employees want to come back for that social connection. They want to come back for collaboration. They want to come back for kind of a touchdown space, a place where they can be productive with their colleagues, a place where they can have mentoring and, you know, professional development. And that has changed in terms of what we thought about the office in the past. The office was like, yeah, we would come in, and whether or not we were doing focus work or not, we would still be coming into that office. I've actually been a mobile worker for a long time, 2 decades, and I have talked to clients for many, many years about what does it mean to create and have mobility as part of your organizational culture and DNA. So I think that we're going through this really big shift right now, and that the clients are realizing both that there is a need, right, for, as Dan said, a lot of my conversations are about hybrid workplace. Our research is showing that 70% of employees want to come back to office, but they want to have that hybrid workplace experience. So we're creating now, and this is what clients are wanting, an experience-driven, resilient type of a workplace where it is the space becomes the place that employees want to come and be. And this is a quote that I have shared so many years, it's a place that really respects and honors the fact that all employees are looking for, really at the end of the day, is autonomy, choice, and freedom. They want to be able to say, where am I going to be most productive on any given day, week, month, or year? And the companies and the clients that we're working with are better understanding that right now, and they're wanting to design spaces that inspire employees to come back, that give them what they need based on the research that we've done and the research that's out there that you all are aware of as well. So, you know, I see that as a human-centric workplace, right? I see that as an office as a social hub. We see that as a way to rethink amenities and spaces to help that encouragement for employees to come back when they need to come back. Maybe it's designs for chance encounters or different ways that people can collaborate and work together. And then we all know this, right? We're seeing the need for more collaboration space, right? So in huddle rooms, so over those individual workstations. And we are helping clients figure that out from space planning and programming perspectives, from sort of the personas that we're helping them to identify how their employees want to work in the future. So I could go on and on, but I want to let others jump into this too. Those are just a few things, Gordon, that we're seeing with our clients and how we're helping them.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic, because I think one of the comments that you made there about having the experience that an employee has, and it's probably something, John, that Microsoft knows a lot about, is user experience. How is this translating out in, you know, the workplace? How are you seeing it?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and really a lot of what Emily said resonates with you know, our future vision for our workplaces as well. You know, I think we're seeing that, yes, flexibility is key, and just, you know, in partnership with HR and other parts of our company, you know, looking at how flexible work guidance that came out last year then translates into, you know, a new way of thinking about our neighborhoods and our team-based spaces has really been top of mind for us. And I think, you know, what we're really seeing is that, you know, one size really does not fit all in terms of workplace solution. Whereas pre-pandemic, we, you know, looked very closely at our different business groups and understood and did research that, you know, obviously engineers work differently than sales and marketing, work differently than customer support. That's become even, I think, more fragmented during the pandemic, where now that we have this dimension of flexibility added in, you know, we know that not every engineer is going to work the same way because their lives are different. They have different family dynamics at home, different things around their work and life that they need to address. And so I think, you know, in terms of the workplace experience, we're really trying to, you know, bring together these policies that we have, HR, other policies, and really recognize that, you know, there has been this fundamental shift with flexibility that is great, and it's really something that you know, our employees have really embraced. But you know, the future workplace solutions are definitely being sort of reimagined to embrace that flexibility as well. And so I think, one of the big challenges is not all of our sites are back. Simply, there's a 6-stage system that we have in terms of when it's safe to return to work. And, without having that hybrid steady state ready to observe of how people have come back to space, we're definitely working with data that we have in front of us today. But I think, we're excited to see what that true hybrid experience is once people are back in the office.
Yeah, that's good. And do you think as you go through these various stages, is there specific pieces that you're trying to gather from your employees about coming back? Do you see any pushback from the employees? Are they looking for certain benchmarks when they come back? Just thinking again back to the title of what's here to stay. Obviously, we were discussing this the other day about how hygiene is going to be very important, wellness in the space. What kind of data points do you see as you hit those various stages?
Yeah. So we recently launched a global return to work survey that got back about 50,000 responses out of the 100,000 employees that it was sent to, which we're very happy with that response rate in terms of workplace surveys. That's high, and so that was really helpful for us to really begin to get, from a sentiment perspective, what are those things that people would come back for, those activities and work modes that are most important to do in the office, as well as from a comfort level, what are some of the important aspects of being able to return to the office that they would expect to see, whether that's desk reservation or the complete rollout of a vaccine in their region, or smaller sort of COVID mitigations that have been in place at our sites since the beginning of the pandemic, whether that's sanitizing strategies in terms of how and when desks and conference rooms are cleaned, whether that's sneeze guards at transaction counters, reception desks, in our lobbies. So that kind of background framework of what makes the workplace safe from a science perspective and a pandemic perspective is kind of a baseline. But I think beyond that, we've really been trying to get into those questions of, what's going to make you come back to the office. And I think just echoing some of the research points that Emily quoted, we're seeing social collaboration and meeting with teams and colleagues as really being kind of some of those key factors for, at least for certain business groups. There's also this really interesting paradox where, the people want to return for social collaboration and meeting with teams, but some people also want to return for focus work. On the flip side, some people's reason for working from home is purely to do focus work. So we kind of have, it goes back to one size not fitting all, that our entire office can't just become a social collaborative area, because there are personas and individuals that do need to come in to do focus work because their home isn't conducive to that. So it's, I think, a really interesting sort of dynamic that's causing us to drill down even deeper into sort of individual teams and business groups.
Yeah, really interesting. How do you see this playing out, Dan? Some of those points that John was making in your consulting role?
Yeah, well, two things. First, I'm going to connect the dots between Emily and John, because, Canadians like to do that. We live, north of 49th. We're trying to make sense of the whole world up here. So, Emily, when you were referring to autonomy, choice, and freedom, which I love, by the way, really, I'll capture that as something that, at least what I'm calling the age of agency. And this age of agency, which is really denoted by your really well put thoughts of autonomy, choice, and freedom, is that, for 18 months, whether you're a leader or individual contributor, you more or less have been in a cocoon, operating from home with your chrysalis, waiting for the monarch to emerge. And your monarch has emerged. And what we all have really said is we want autonomy, choice, and freedom of our work. And so that can be where you work, so we won't cover that, but the place of work, i.e. the physical domain is actually what has happened. And so what we're seeing, to connect John's point, is organizations having to deal with that agency. And so, before the pandemic, remember that was like 2 weeks ago, right? The organizations would, do whatever they could to keep their employees on site. Foosball, free food, free buses if you're on the 101 in California or whatever, right? It's just like, we need you here. We'd like you to stay late. We won't pay you, but we'll please stay late so we can get more hours out of you. Well, that cocoon during the last 18 months of the pandemic has created this scenario. And John's right. You have, employees who are sick to death of operating in isolation from their 1-bedroom condo in the middle of Manhattan. Or they're like, you know what? I only want to come in once a month or once a week because I do miss some of that camaraderie. I do miss the brainstorming and strategy stuff. I do miss the free muffin every Wednesday. So I would like to come in on my terms. And so the employee is like, what you got for me, employer? Because if you don't provide that autonomy, choice, and freedom, the agency that I deserve, guess what? It turns out that on Glassdoor, there's a gazillion places that are telling me they are offering this, or I'll just go to the next help wanted ad online and say, hey, guess what? I'm a developer, I'm a project lead, I'm an analyst. They're offering that, so I'm going to go walk across the street and work for them now. So in sum, to be honest, Gordon, we're in a state of leadership reckoning. And if organizations and their senior leaders haven't looked at their culture, haven't looked at their operating practices, haven't done what Microsoft have done with Satya Nadella, the CEO, Kathleen Hogan, the CHRO, and said, you know what, we certainly better be a little more empathic about what this whole go to work thing means and craft the right culture in which to allow that to manifest and materialize, in the middle of the pandemic and certainly post-pandemic. Again, there's going to be a reckoning, and I wish good luck to those who think that they're going to be anything like they were prior to the pandemic.
Dan, I'm going to jump in here. What do you think the abiding gains, the wins, are going to be in agency, choice, and freedom? What does that look like on the ground in successful corporations?
Well, as it turns out, it's a really good question, Nick. So again, I'm a bit of a policy academic wonk. Yes, I guess I'm a realist. I'm a pragmatist as well, working as an exec inside of organizations, or as you say, like an executive consultant. But here's the deal, right? Every piece of causal data that I've ever gotten my hands on suggests two things. One, a highly engaged organization that has the right attributes, culture dimensions, the ways in which that obviously treat us as human beings inside the org, wherever that may be, have a higher performance rate, have a higher productivity rate, have a higher output, whether that's EBITDA, revenue, profitability, share price, customer sat, whatever. Now, the flip side, Nick, is pretty obvious. Those organizations that are disengaged, and if you look at studies like from Gallup or Aon Hewitt, Blessing White, just to name a few, they dictate a result that is when you have a very lowly motivated, disenfranchised even, certainly disengaged employee base, what happens? You don't have the great creativity, innovation. You certainly don't have high customer sat. And customers start walking, let alone employees saying, WTH, what the hell am I doing here? And so now with the connected dot of agency, employees don't care about you anymore as the employer if you're not going to provide and provision them with this culture, with this engagement, and certainly with the hybrid work opportunity. So again, back to leadership reckoning, I would not want to be in a C-suite right now if my culture sucked and I wasn't planning for hybrid work.
And do you agree in the widespread or much storied line that culture is harder remotely, at a distance? Distributed working culture is harder, engagement's harder to maintain?
No. Like what happens is if you craft the right culture, regardless of location, regardless of place and time, if you begin with humanity, if you begin with humaneness, if you begin with empathy, if you begin with the right business processes that allow culture to manifest in this open, transparent, honest, proactive, systemic way, It doesn't matter, Nick, where you work from. You could be on Mars. I mean, it might be a little bit latent with the, the whole Wi-Fi issue up there, but it will work.
That's a very interesting point of view, Dan. And I'm sure we could run a vote sometime on how many agree with you. I think there's a challenge. I think there is some challenge about remoteness and culture and engagement, but that's fine. Emily's probably got another frame on that.
I'd like to see what Emily's frame is on that, especially in the lens of change management. Emily, you look like you've got something on the tip of your tongue.
I mean, I'm smiling because I absolutely agree with some of the things, of course, Dan, Dan's sharing, that you're sharing. I think that we have moved into a moment of employee-driven flexibility. And so the outcomes of what, Dan, you have shared is true, that, very early on in sort of any kind of conversations in recruiting for talent, employees are asking, tell me more share a little more about your culture. Tell me a little bit more about what what do you have learned since the pandemic and how your culture is evolving, and what do you think is going to be really important going forward? So my perspective is, we have moved towards this employee-driven flexibility. And what we know from also research in designing and redesigning and recalibrating space, physical office space, is that 83% of companies say that flexible work, this hybrid workplace, this flexibility is actually going to impact the design. And we're seeing that with our clients in wanting to know how to answer the questions they have about how much space they're going to need and how they need to shift their space typologies to create more collaboration and, open different types of space. But I want to come back to just briefly the issues about culture, Dan, that you brought up too, and that, you guys have asked that question. Now, I tend to kind of follow more of the middle road here, but I agree. What we're doing right here and now in the moment that we're in is that we are challenging long-held assumptions. And so when you think about and apply change management, you have to think about the long-held assumptions that we've always had about culture, yes, or productivity, or face time, or any of those kinds of things. And you have to apply kind of these levers of change, which of course we use the ProSci methodology and moving through that through preparing for change, managing change, and reinforcing change. But there's a lot in there also about kind of coaching leaders and managers to help them better understand the things that, Dan, you were sharing, what employees are looking for, what they're no longer willing to accept, and how you can, as a leader and a manager, evolve your thinking, based on where we are right now and what employees need. Now, I think culturally, we can create spaces even digitally, virtually, to be able to help connect people. And maybe that's a very intentional thing. Like, for example, we have coffee hours, right? We have design discussions on a weekly basis. We have different kinds of topic-focused events that are happening and have happened virtually that help to address those issues of culture, right? That, in the past have always been done in person. But I think a mix of this will be a healthy one going forward that will meet the hybrid workplace. And that is, we can create and hatch and develop and sustain cultures in this phygital, right? The phygital world that we've all heard of, that mix of digital and physical. And what does that look like? It can look like creating things virtually that are events, that are cultural events, culturally, driven events that help connect employees. And we can also, as we redesign and rethink about what our office is, create those events that are special events, to come in person for, but that doesn't have to be the way that we've done it in the past. And I think that's what we're recognizing with organizations today, and that the research is showing, and just really builds off of what Dan has shared.
Yeah, that's excellent. I think there is definitely going to be a mix where companies are going to have to reckon with the fact that, hybrid working is here to stay, and we need to continue those waypoints of culture throughout. So whether I come in the office, whether it's a swag pack that's mailed out to me, whether it's, we're meeting up at a remote destination for a team building exercise, but each of those waypoints of culture still need to come back together. And just curious, John, how are you building culture into the way that you're trying to attract persons back into the space, but versus when they were working remotely?
Yeah, it's a great topic. We see culture resonating very differently in our different business groups in terms of how remote work has affected it. And so if we look at sales employees, for example, they've never had greater customer engagement than over the last, over the last 18 months. And that as a result, in terms of, having that greater engagement has actually fostered kind of a greater team culture. Targets are being met, and we see actually a stronger team culture for some of our groups that have been all remote versus engineering, where we know that really those in-person cultural touch points are perhaps a little bit more important. And so I think we're really just trying to, again, recognize the difference between our business groups and how culture and collaboration has been affected, and adjusting our workplace planning principles from there. And so, yeah, I mean, there's all sorts of internal methods where touch points that we have remotely with our culture through all hands, be it with Satya, our CEO, or with at a more local team level. Methods that every company is doing, whether it's a one-on-one, larger meeting. But these cultural touch points, I think, are further improving through technology. If I look at kind of our product groups in terms of teams and how that software and hardware is evolving, to provide a more equitable meeting experience for remote and in-person attendees. I think technology is a great enabler to help help have a stronger culture while we are all remote. Although to Dan's point, I do feel like, just in our case at least, there are going to be these groups that that still say that culture has suffered over the last 18 months, and that they're ready to get back in front of the whiteboard and be with each other in a room, even though we all know there's all sorts of virtual whiteboards, there's tools, we've all made it work, but there's just, for some rhythms of business and work, being back with each other in a team space is really kind of where those cultural connections happen. So I think it's varied across the portfolio.
Can I just ask on that one, John? Sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Emily. We often hear about innovation and problem solving being better together in the room, face to face, and so on. Does your experience with your engineers teams and technical guys and units reflect that?
Yeah, our research through surveys and focus groups definitely indicates that while productivity, if measured from a very, if measured from the perspective of how many requests an engineer might be submitting, how many code requests they might be submitting, productivity has gone up because people are working more, but really that innovation and brainstorming aspect has suffered. And while we just launched Microsoft Viva, which is an employee experience platform, there's still a lot of great innovation coming out. But I think what we're hearing kind of at the ground level is that those conversations that happen in the room together can be really valuable too, and are missed by some. Now, all that said, again, this is the hybrid work paradox that we like to talk about, is that there's certain people that hybrid work, and it could be an engineer, it could be anyone, that hybrid work has been really great for, in terms of remote meetings are actually more equitable in terms of there's research showing that someone who might not speak up as much in a meeting room with everyone else due to body language or maybe being intimidated, they have a greater opportunity to chime in on a remote meeting. And so, it's really, it ultimately is not just role-based. It comes down to person and sort of their own behavior. But yeah, I think, culture is varied, and it's varied by team and by business and individual leadership within even a smaller team level plays into that a lot. And I guess just one other connection that I wanted to make to Dan that I really liked, when we talk about empathy, the idea of having flexible work guidance around in terms of an HR announcement or wherever it comes through, it's only part of the picture. And we've talked about change management a bit and transitioning to this flexible world. But I think the empathy that not only teammates, but particularly managers have to have during this period is kind of new and unprecedented, just in terms of how their own actions might influence or kind of turn the flexibility guidelines. If there's full flexibility to work where you want, but a manager is coming in every day, that manager has to think very strongly about kind of the culture that they're creating and how they're communicating with their team about their own work patterns, and because that can influence other people's actions beyond the flexibility guidance. So yeah, I think the element of empathy, it's become even more important in this flexible and varied world.
Thanks, John. And I think are these manifestations evidences of whether or not there's genuine care among management? Would you say, Dan?
Nick, you had me at hello. You had me at care. Yeah, I mean, here's the thing, right? Like before the pandemic, we knew that we had issues in our organizations from a culture, leadership, engagement perspective, right? I mean, whatever data point you look at, generally speaking, in North America, and indeed the Western world, our engagement scores on average are somewhere, depending on what survey, between 28 and 40%, which means, upwards of 2/3 of the organization are either not engaged, which means they're kind of on the fence, right? Or they're disengaged. And then the pandemic hit, and we had a wonderful couple months where finally, because humanity took over for about 3 or 4 months, leaders looked at their teams and said, oh my gosh, we're all going through this together. What can I do to help? And then, in my opinion, like by the summer of 2020, that sort of dissipated and reverted back to, yeah, we got to kind of go back to the old way. We're just going to do it in this, digital remote way. So honestly, Nick, like this is an opportunity. I mean, the pandemic has cast a horrible, tragic, deathly shadow over society. I mean, come on, there's like millions of deaths. Let's not kid ourselves. However, just like in World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Afghan War, when you come out of a tragedy or you're in the middle of it, you kind of look around and say, well, what might we do differently? Absolutely. And I think this is our opportunity, right? And again, like with my experience as a chief learning officer, chief envisioner at TELUS, it's not an insignificant company. There was and I'm still on retainer with them, so I'm pretty close. There's 50,000 employees globally and about 30,000 in Canada. In 2009, because we decided to shift the culture, we also shifted to what we call flexible work styles. And we wanted to make it empathic, open, transparent, et cetera. But what does flexible work styles mean? We shifted 2/3 of the organization over a 3-year period to be home-based 90% of the time or mobile. So a 50-50 split between home and the office. So revenues didn't suffer. It went up every year, about 10%. Profitability, same thing. We cooked up ideas like opening up our own television network, essentially. Like it's just, it's possible, but I do agree with both Emily and John. You need to have the balance. You still need face-to-face. I mean, I've been saying on my Twitter handle and LinkedIn for the last 18 months, I'm a hugger on hiatus. Now it's a platonic hug when I get back to the office, obviously, right? But that's kind of what it is. I'm a caring type of guy, Nick. So I think there's more leaders that need to care, remember about the hugging, and still have that collegiality in whatever space and time form that it is.
Yeah, it's interesting. We have a comment in here from Terry asked the question about what do you say to people who believe the water cooler moment spontaneity can't be replaced? What would you say about that? How do we create those either virtually, or how do we create those moments?
First of all, I'll take this first, and then like Emily and John chime in on this one. It's a myth. It's like a unicorn. There is no data whatsoever that says that if you're not face to face, then ideas don't spawn. Like, first of all, that's a myth. However, that being said, we do know that engagement, new networks, the strength of weak ties, the Marcus Granovetter beautiful paper from 1973, they're increased when you do have more bumps and collisions. And we do know that through some of those bumps and collisions, that through the networks and the strength of weak ties, that ideas percolate. But the water cooler is not the point. It is about how we build up networks, both physically, i.e. face-to-face, and digitally. So now more than ever, and Microsoft does a really good job of this, right? How they cultivate networks across their different cities, their different offices and countries. Microsoft is not all in Redmond, Washington. Let's be clear. They've got, tens of thousands of employees across the world. So how do you think Microsoft's been inventing Viva and other things? It's not just because they're face-to-face. It's because they've got a culture of empathy and care, but it's also of networking and connecting dot to dot.
Yeah, and I just want to add to that too. I think those are great points, Dan. One of the things that we know, like we know now that empathy is a huge leadership skill set, so important in this time now and going forward. We also know that during this crisis, right, never let a crisis go to waste, which is the quote that I was thinking about as you were talking about this, is that we shared more of our whole selves, right? I often ask this question, how do we bring our whole selves to work? How do we create a more humanized workplace? And in our lives of like, we were all in this together, right? We were able to share more authentically. We were more vulnerable. We were creating the kinds of conversations with our teams, our colleagues, with leaders that really more fully humanized all of us, right? And I think that those are some of the good things that came out of this time that could translate into, what perceptions were of the past when we thought about what happens around the water cooler, right? How was your weekend? Tell me about what's going on. How's your family? What activities did you do? We can also recreate that a little bit more, because I think over this past year, and all of us would agree to this, and those who are listening, we have had to be able to share more of ourselves and our lives. I actually have my office backdrop, but like this is my home office, right? And there are things that have happened, especially if we had kids and the kids are home, during the year when they were not in school. I mean, there was just, they're virtual school. I just think that companies have to be very thoughtful and intentional. And I want to have John weigh in on this also. Thoughtful and intentional about what was it about those water cooler moments that were so great that we thought about in the past, and how do we apply it through the lens of where we are now? And we are able to say we're in a different place now. We can either default back into old patterns, behaviors, and norms, or we can take what we have learned and carry that forward and create this, digital experience of culture. And knowing that it does not have to be mutually exclusive. You don't have to have the just in person, and you don't have to have just the digital. We are creating this new workplace as we're living it.
Do you think Emily, do you think it's sorry, John. I just wondering, do you think it means we have to put more effort into the culture, the connections, the care, because we're digital or hybrid? Phygital if you like, but I hate the word.
So ask that question again, Nick, because I didn't hear the first part.
Does it mean we need to put more effort, more energy into that evident care and culture, looking after one another? It might be management to employee, it might be in any direction. because of
Yeah,
distance?
absolutely. I mean, this kind of a operating environment, right? So this operating environment, hybrid workplace, will require sort of the upskilling, the leading and managing high performance distributed teams. This is stuff that I've done in the past. How do we equip leaders and managers with the kind of knowledge that, if they haven't already had it, to understand what they must have really going forward to get the best out of their teams and to meet the teams where they're at and what they need. You know, another thing I just want to share before, and then I want John to have an opportunity to talk here too, is that I was part of a team that created this roadmap for return. You guys, we all saw this, like, how are we going to get back into the office, right? We all sort of developed something like that in our leveraging our expertise. I actually think what would be helpful right now is almost like a return to culture, like a roadmap that helps companies better understand this in more concretized ways. Like, how can we address a roadmap and, educational pieces for leaders and managers to understand what does culture look like now, right? And how do we do that? What are the actual recommendations that we have to be able to do that, both in the digital workspace and the physical one? I think it could be helpful.
Yeah.
That's great. Sorry, John, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No worries. I guess the water cooler conversation, and Emily and both what Emily and Dan were saying, that it doesn't have to be one or the other. Totally agree with. And I think one thing we've been trying to do is dissect as much as you can scientifically, like, why was that water cooler conversation great? Is it because it was face to face, or is it something else? And I think the term spontaneity is what comes up in all of our focus groups and engagements. It's not that you're the fact that we have meetings back to back all day, and that every little connect has to be scheduled. You have to grab that 10 minutes on someone's calendar. It's a forced bump in, and there is an opportunity with technology to help enable spontaneous connection. And I'm in no way related, just as a disclaimer, to our product group or anything, so this isn't a plug for Viva at all. But if we look at virtual employee experience, it's really having those platforms that allow for ad hoc, spontaneous collaboration, even if it is still virtual, like that's still powerful. And just because it's not at the physical water cooler doesn't mean that it's not contributing to culture and collaboration. And so I think, I'm interested to see the evolution of, how technology is enabling those things. And then also in the workplace, when those do happen, how can they become equitable in a way that if someone, for whatever reason, doesn't want to be in the office, they're not losing out on those things. And it's not about putting cameras everywhere and surveilling it and having a virtual option for everything, but I think just it's interesting thinking about how we can make those experiences equitable through technology and also workplace design.
I just want to add one other thing when we think about that too, John, is the technology solution, right? If you think about the apps or the different solutions that are already out there or that will come, like, imagine, Monday starts and you realize, you're being paired with somebody to have a 15-minute coffee conversation that you haven't seen because you haven't been in the office for a while. Both of you haven't. And what that does is it's a solution to address maybe some of the downsides of all being virtual, right? That can be, we operate in silos, or we haven't seen one another in a long time and we miss, that togetherness, or, the research is showing that, we're missing that connection or those spontaneous conversations. I think the technology is already and will continue to, like, I think about that reminders I get because we do use Teams, every day. Could it be every week, you're meeting with so-and-so, and that's not somebody you're collaborating with on a regular basis. So as a way to still maintain those connections that address what those spontaneous things happen already when you're in the office. There's one other point that I just want to make here too, and that is innovation can happen anywhere, right? So we have to remember that our innovative ideas can happen in the shower. They can happen on our walk with our dogs. They can happen in what we think are inconsequential moments of our lives that end up being very consequential. So we also have to remember that too when we think about the past. Okay, the innovation and the new product ideas that come out of just collisions. Well, sometimes it's not only those collisions, it's the different times that happens in our lives. And then it's just, where do we carry that? How do we capture that? Those innovative ideas to make sure we don't lose them. That could be part of, solutions for addressing what we have lost in person.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think, Emily, one comment that I wanted to, when we were catching up earlier this week, you had made a point that we're going to have to live with COVID. I mean, whether it becomes the new seasonal flu, whatever it is, it's here to stay in some shape and form. And I even noticed a question had come in about, John had asked a question. I see some companies that are just like pre-pandemic, no masks, sitting side by side, no fear. And the next appointment, there's no cars in the lot. So really, this is evolving, right? And I think as leaders in the workplace, we're going to have to find those moments to be flexible enough that when the next pandemic, it is going to happen, whatever it may be, we need to be flexible enough to make that change. What are you thinking around that, Dan? How do you see that evolving? To be nimble enough. It's really that culture of care, isn't it? Because if you care long and hard enough about your employees, whatever the pressure is that's rolled in on a company, you should be able to rise to the occasion. What do you think?
I'm old, I think, because I remember the title of a Traveling Wilburys album, and it was called Handle with Care. And if you don't know the Traveling Wilburys, you should go Google them, because it was Dylan and Orbison and George Harrison. It was just amazing. But the point being is that's the title of an album. And where'd they get it from? Because they were staring when they were doing their recordings and studio rehearsals, if you will, in a garage. They looked at a box, and the box said Fragile, Handle with Care. And so, I think leaders need to be thinking about what's in the box. If it's our employees, if it's our culture, if it's the way in which we're going to operate, we need to handle with care all those new intricacies of the hybrid world. And we can't go back to the way it was. I mean, for leaders who thought they should be operating through hierarchy because power is how they ruled, they've had a rude awakening, haven't they? And the same thing now. It's a chance to redesign not just your culture, but the way in which that you lead. So if you expect bums in seats post-pandemic to manage the culture or to manage your team, you have missed the train, the BART train, if you're in California, right, on what is outcomes-based culture. We, I think, over the pandemic have moved unknowingly and almost serendipitously to outcomes-based because we haven't been face-to-face. So now what we can do is improve upon the outcomes base with some touch points that are physical, that we do come back in the office, and some folks will be there full time and some won't. But how do we create that culture of care, handle with care through outcomes based that allows team members to bring, I love what Emily said, their best selves to work. Like, stop with the Teflon suits, right? We all have something that's going wrong at home. We have some inequities in our lives. We have cognitive or emotional differences from others on our team. We bring that to work. We are not robots. We're not morons. We're human beings. And so when leaders come to grips with that, they will create the best culture ever, regardless of place.
And
Love it.
do you think, just to extend that, Dan, a good culture becomes the most resilient organization?
Oh, absolutely. And again, I'm not going to put John on the spot or ask him for his opinion, but as an outsider and knowing players across Microsoft, I'll say this. The Steve Ballmer era at Microsoft wasn't so great for its culture. And when the board, et cetera, took a look around and said, yes, Satya is our individual, and Satya's one of his first moves was to bring in or to sort of promote Kathleen Hogan, a CHRO, they right then and there said, we're going to get rid of these 43 HR competencies. We're going to focus on not being a know-it-all organization, but being a learn-it-all organization. That's Nadella's words. And they have since, for the better part of the last 6 years, done that and withstood a pandemic, and still last year, or this past, I guess, 12 months, hired 25,000 people. And they kind of fluctuate between being the the most profitable and or worth organization on the planet. That's an outcome, right, of 6 years of leadership. And Microsoft, it's just coincidence that John's here. It's a coincidence that John's here. However, Microsoft is a great capstone case study.
John?
Yeah. No, I mean, in full honesty, I joined in the middle of the pandemic, and so I'm, seeing the culture from the inside in this pandemic setting. And yeah, I think there's so many things that an organization can do to still create a strong culture of care in this remote setting. And yeah, I think those are great points, Dan.
So the culture of care is here to stay, isn't it? That's,
yes.
I think, probably one of the overriding things that as leaders in our workplaces and as we're consulting, as we're collaborating, is just really the culture of care is here to stay. And maybe some of that lethargy and hierarchy is gone for good, hopefully, if you're going to be a progressive organization. So as we're here in the final minutes of our discussion, really, again, appreciate you all for coming on. Just love any further thoughts, Emily, around this discussion and topic?
Other than I could keep going on and on for another hour with all you guys. It's
we'll
great.
We'll do 2.0 in a couple
I
weeks.
I know. And I say this for all of us and for everybody who's tuning in and listening to this. I think that the idea of where we're at today is about what does it mean to live with COVID, and I say that, what does it mean for all of us? What does it mean for our organizations? What does it mean for how we work, where we work, when we work? And I think we were all in the summer, sort of collectively, a majority of people were like, okay, we're going to get back. We're going to sort of figure out this hybrid workplace. We're going to come back in generally, in September. And then we had the COVID variant of Delta. And then I think where we're at right now is realizing almost that, wow, we can't focus on a date or a day where this is all going to go away and somehow we're going to come back to where we were. We're going to have to live with disruptive events like this and pandemics and maybe other variants. And maybe at some point, yes, we will get to a place where, it'll be like the flu, but right now that's not where we are. And I think the train left the station and we have to be on that train that left that station, because you can never really, you don't want to go back, right? So the ability to say and answer and solve for what does it mean for our organizations to live with COVID and how does that translate into still creating these amazing organizations and cultures of care. I think what's happened also and shifted, I'll leave it here, is that this employee-driven flexibility is also really married with shared leadership, so that we are all helping to co-create together this workplace of the future. It's not just that hierarchy, just your senior executive leaders creating it. Yes, they're helping to enable to make some very good decisions, business ones, but those organizations that are leading in the future are going to be the ones that truly understand that culture of care as part of the organizational DNA is important, that flexibility and mobility is completely here to stay, that shared leadership is really about how we journey together, right? We're on this adventure, we're sharing, and this is how you engage your employees. They are connected to the end result of what the outcomes are going to be going forward. But still the future is uncertain, we don't know yet. But I think we're on a good ride. It's transformation.
I like it. Well, I want to thank all of you very much again for joining us, and really appreciate Emily, John, and Dan for being part of this discussion today. And then also for those that joined on, that listened in, thank you very much, especially those on LinkedIn Live. Also wanted to extend a big welcome to anybody that's going to be at NeoCon. We are going to continue this discussion in a format at NeoCon the first week of October. Feel free to check out our website where there's a link for that, and look forward to catching up again. Thank you all.
Great.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.